Good evening, Roseville, and welcome to the May 18th, 2021 City of Roseville Transportation Commission meeting. The Transportation Commission is meeting via video conference to adhere to Governor Newsom's stay-at-home order. Pursuant to paragraph 3 of Executive Order N-2920, executed by the Governor on March 17th, 2020, and as a response to mitigating the spread of coronavirus, known as COVID-19, the Transportation Commission meeting will allow members of the public to participate and address the Transportation Commission during the open session of the meeting. There are two ways to accomplish this. Public comment may be submitted by telephone during the meeting and prior to the close of public comment on any agenda item by calling the number on the screen, 916-774-5353. If you call, you may be placed on hold until the attendant can answer. The broadcast is delayed by up to 30 seconds when watching at home. When your call is transferred, you will have 3 minutes for public comment on items not on the agenda and 5 minutes in which to speak to a regular agenda item. Your time will be monitored and you will be informed when you have 1 minute left with your comments. If you're listening to the meeting while calling in, please turn down the volume on the meeting in order to avoid interference. When calling, please do not use the speakerphone option as it may create difficulty for us to hear your comments. Public comment will also be accepted by email at publiccomment@roseville.ca.us. That's publiccomment@roseville.ca.us. Comments received by email will be summarized by general topic and will be made part of the meeting record. Commissioners, for motions and seconds, I ask that you please state your name prior to making your motion or second. Makes it easier for the clerk and for me. We will have the clerk call the roll after each item. I will now officially call the meeting to order. Lainey, can you please call roll?
Sure. Commissioner Birdsong.
Here.
Commissioner Festerson.
Here.
Commissioner Groff.
Here.
And Commissioner Husking.
Present.
Yes.
Present.
Commissioner Eisenhower. Commissioner Probst.
Here.
Commissioner Radford.
Present.
And Chair Short.
Here. Okay. Thank you, Lainey. Commissioner Festerson, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I will. Put your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to which the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Festerson. We're now going to move into public comment. This is a time for anyone who would like to address the commission on any transportation-related item that is not on tonight's agenda. Again, speakers shall restrict their comments to issues that are within the subject jurisdiction of our Transportation Commission, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The Brown Act, with certain exceptions, does not permit this commission to discuss or take action on issues that are not listed on the agenda. Do we like to address the commission on any item not on tonight's agenda?
Thank you, Chair Short. So far, we do not, but we'll wait about a minute to see if anyone calls in.
Sure.
I believe Commissioner Eisenhower has joined us. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Alrighty, it appears that we do not have any public comments.
All right, in that case, I will close public comment. Next item on the agenda is the approval of our January 19th, 2021 minutes. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those. Would any commissioner like to make a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Audrey Husking, I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Do we have a second?
Commissioner Festerson, second.
Motion by Commissioner Husking, second by Commissioner Festerson. Lainey, can you please call the roll?
Commissioner Birdsong.
Present.
Commissioner Festerson.
Yes.
Commissioner Groff.
Yes.
Commissioner Husking.
Yes.
Commissioner Eisenhower.
Yes.
Commissioner Probst.
Yes.
Commissioner Radford. Commissioner Radford.
Yes for me.
Okay. And Chair Short.
Yes,
Thank you.
it's unanimous. Thank you, Lainey.
Mhm.
We'll move on to our presentations. The first one is 6.1, the Placer Rides Non-Emergency Medical Transportation. Our board, can we please have the presentation?
Good evening, Chair Short and Transportation Commissioners. My name is Mike Dewar, Alternative Transportation Manager for the city. And I'm pleased to introduce Kathleen Hanley from the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, who'll be providing this informational presentation on Placer Rides, a new non-emergency medical transportation service for Placer County. Kathleen.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you to Chair Short and the rest of the Transportation Commissioners for having me here this evening. I'm pleased to provide an update to you all and hopefully gain some valuable feedback and share with folks who regularly attend your meetings. So if I could have the next slide here. First, I want to provide a little bit of feedback on, or a little bit of information on the agency that I'm coming from. So I work for Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. We aren't Placer County and we aren't Placer County Transit. The bulk of the work that my agency does is fund regionally significant road, rail, bike, pedestrian, and transit projects and develop plans and project development work to support the implementation of those projects. One of the hats that we wear is the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. You'll hear me refer to that as the CTSA through the rest of this presentation. And the CTSA is a joint powers authority agreement between all of the cities and the county in Placer to provide social services transportation programs to Placer. Most counties in California have a designated CTSA, and Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency has been the designated CTSA for Placer County since 2008. In addition to the program I'm talking about today called Placer Rides, we also operate a bus pass subsidy program and the South Placer Call Center, which is jointly administered with the city of Roseville. So it's possible that you've seen or heard of a number of our programs before. Next slide. I'm going to begin by talking about the programs that we had prior to the CTSA board making the decision to create Placer Rides at their April 28, 2021 meeting. So we used to have two programs called Health Express and My Rides. And both of these programs offered non-emergency medical transportation trips between jurisdictions within Placer. So our existing dial-a-ride services in Roseville and the ones operated by Placer County Transit in Lincoln, Rockland, along the Taylor Road corridor in Loomis and along Highway 49. You can't take trips between those two operating areas. So for folks who say live in Rockland and have an appointment outside of Roseville, they need a means to be able to get between those two trips. So previously, CTSA used to operate two different programs, one called Health Express, which provided contracted sort of dial-a-ride, shorter buses, contract workers, same type of service as dial-a-ride, and a volunteer service that I'll get into called My Rides shortly. So the Health Express program that we jointly administered with MV and Seniors First was very expensive. It cost us about $750,000 a year to operate, of which CTSA funded the majority of that. And it did, although it ranges, of course, over the last 5 fiscal years, about 5,500 trips per year. This results in a really high cost per trip, looking at over $120 per trip in the fiscal year that ended with the COVID-19 pandemic. And with the spacing requirements and the shelter-in-place closures, we've actually seen that cost creep near $150 over the last 6 months. Next slide. In addition to the increasing cost in providing this service, because we do it on a contract basis, there's a high overhead cost. So even though we've seen these steep declines in ridership, particularly on the back end of this graph, since the stay-at-home order, the taxpayers haven't been able to recoup any of the benefits of providing this decreased service. We operate on a contract basis, so we still pay essentially the same amount, regardless of how many folks ride the service. So it just gets more and more expensive on a per trip basis. Next slide. The second program, called My Rides, was operated a lot more cost effectively. So it's a volunteer reimbursement program, which means that Seniors First, one of our nonprofit partners who operates out of Auburn and serves the whole Placer County community, would maintain a list of eligible riders and a list of eligible drivers, and then sort of match riders and volunteer drivers who are able to provide the trips that they need. And then CTSA would pay the cost on a per mile basis of those trips. So reimbursing the volunteer drivers, sort of similar to how you would do a corporate reimbursement for trips that you take for work. Obviously, that costs us a lot less to provide, a total cost of around $300,000 a year, which CTSA pays the majority of, and has about the same ridership as Health Express. But because of that dramatically decreased cost, the cost per trip is about $40 per actual use. And because this program, the way it was structured, was able to scale in the COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to only pay for the trips that we were actually providing instead of continuing to pay for the maximum amount in non-COVID circumstances. Next slide. However, ridership on this program has decreased significantly over the last 5 years, even before the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, as indicated by this chart. This has a lot to do with volunteer availability. The issue is that Seniors First is really good at recruiting volunteers in the Auburn area and in the Roseville area, but we have a lot of need for these transportation services, particularly in our unincorporated and outlying communities. Folks who live in Penryn and Sheridan and Newcastle, who are a lot farther from medical facilities than residents of Roseville and who don't benefit from having dial-a-ride service in their community. So because of this mismatch between volunteers and drivers, even though it's really cost effective to provide, the program could never really scale to the need. And we have this ever growing list of folks who need trips and never enough drivers to supply the trips. Next slide. As a result of these creeping costs, CTSA has also had a decrease in revenue. So our expenses have continued to grow for both of these programs. The revenues have also grown, with the exception of the year where we took a holiday in fiscal year 2018, which I'm happy to get into in the Q&A portion if someone is curious. But essentially, with the next slide, please. The result is that we had a significant reliance on carryover previously for our programs. That's the gray area in the shaded chart. And with the stay-at-home order, we didn't want to eliminate anyone's service, particularly with medical issues being necessary and not having a good understanding of how long this would last. So we chose to eat into the carryover and continue both programs through fiscal year 2020. As a result, we ate most of our carryover. So the CTSA program needed to rein in its belt and bring its programs back down to our regular revenue size so that we can continue to be a fiscally constrained program. Next slide. So given all that information, the CTSA board in April made the decision to take the two Health Express and My Rides programs and formally terminate them effective June 30th, 2021, but in effect to combine them both into a new program called Placer Rides. And Placer Rides will be jointly administered by CTSA and Seniors First, with support from Independent Living Partnership, a Riverside-based nonprofit that works specifically with suburban and rural communities to provide these volunteer-based transportation systems that are able to scale. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the program entails and how it differs from My Rides, the previous volunteer-based transportation program that we have or will continue to have till June 30th and the new program starting July 1. So in the My Rides model, Seniors First staff had the majority of the responsibility. They were doing all the eligibility determinations for riders and drivers, doing all the scheduling, reporting, not just to the riders and the drivers, but also to all their funding entities. Of course, doing invoicing and internal accounting, recruiting on both the rider and the driver end, constantly trying to secure more volunteers throughout the Placer County community, maintaining logs of individual driver insurance, staying up to date every time somebody renewed their insurance and getting the new number, and also keeping contact lists for both systems. By comparison, the rider had a relatively small role in the model. So they applied for the program and they would request rides whenever they need them, but didn't have a lot of responsibility or accountability for implementing and securing their own ride. And while this worked great for the 40 or so people a month who were able to secure rides through this program, because of the big number of tasks that Seniors First staff was responsible with, this is part of the reason why we had this scaling issue. And there are many, many more rides who would do step 1, apply for the program, and step 2, request rides, but who were never able to schedule or be matched with drivers. Next slide. So in the new model, these responsibilities get shifted around a little bit. CTSA, my office, is still the funding entity. We still fund Seniors First. However, Seniors First just deals with sort of the front end and the back end of the trip. So they'll do the eligibility determination to ensure that all the riders are eligible for the program. And they'll still do monthly reporting on how many trips were taken and miles that were done and what the reimbursement should be. And then they'll focus on doing referrals to other programs. A lot of times with folks that we see coming to CTSA's services, transportation isn't their only need. In many cases, they benefit from Meals on Wheels or better connection to the Social Security office or assistance with case managers for various issues. And Seniors First staff is really good about making those referrals and helping folks get connected with many different types of services. So in the new model, the riders are responsible for, they're empowered and responsible for sort of securing their own ride. So in this model, rather than Seniors First having a list of riders and drivers and sort of matchmaking strangers, in this model, riders will look in their own community to find folks to be able to provide their rides, looking to their neighbors, extended family members, folks they go to church with, friends, people they know in general, and recruiting those individuals who are already in their lives to provide their volunteer trips and using the Plaza Rides program as a financial incentive to make them more comfortable in asking for a favor. So because the rider is centered in this program rather than having Seniors First centered in this program, it operates a lot more like those of us who have more access to resources are able to secure rides for, say, a trip to the airport. Like, we don't consult, we don't need permission, we just sort of identify a person who we trust, who we think is reliable to provide that trip for us to the airport. We schedule it on our own time. And then in the case of Plaza Rides model, if you took this trip to a medical appointment, you would then just report on a monthly basis to Seniors First, say, hey, I took these trips, here's who my volunteer driver was, here's how many miles. And then Seniors First would provide the reimbursement on the per mileage basis for eligible trips. Next slide. The big advantage of this program is how much service we're able to provide. So the way we currently operate with the combined Health Express and MyRides programs, we do about 100,000 annual miles of actual trips. We serve about 100 unduplicated riders from month to month, about 30 drivers, including volunteers and the professional drivers we contract with. And the total cost of that program is about $1.3 million, all told, staff expenses, overhead, all of that. With the proposed service, of course, this is estimated, so it's hard for me to know how much demand that will be, but I could provide 800,000 annual miles for 333 unduplicated riders, assuming that each of those unduplicated riders does the maximum amount of miles permitted per month, which is unlikely. And then each of those riders could, of course, have as many drivers as they'd like to have, but probably at least one per person. And the total cost of all that in the new program would be just $500,000. So we're able to dramatically scale the amount of service that we can provide for a lot less money. Next slide. Because we can scale this program up so much while still remaining cost effective, we're also able to increase the eligibility for this program, which has been a recurrent need for some of these communities. So previously, MyRides and Health Express were only open to seniors and individuals with disabilities and only for non-emergency medical trips. In practice, we've considered a lot of things to be non-emergency medical trips: physical therapy, pharmacy, grocery. We've sort of taken a wide umbrella. But with the new cost-effective nature of the new program, we're able to actually format in policy this expanded eligibility. So Plaza Rides will, in addition to seniors and individuals with disabilities, will also be open to low-income individuals. And in addition to non-emergency medical trips, it will be open for any type of essential errand. So in practice, that will, of course, be grocery store appointments, trips to Social Security, any type of other social service folks need to access. But Seniors First staff are going to be empowered to act on a case-by-case basis to determine what's essential for that individual. Next slide. This program, the system of the program where the rider identifies their own driver and the funding entity just sort of manages the front and the back end of the program, has a really successful track record. Independent Living Partnership, that nonprofit I talked about earlier, has implemented this program across California and across the country in communities very similar to Placer County, and has had a lot of great success in scaling the program. Next slide. So the implementation timeline that this service change has been on began in January with the CTSA board providing direction to staff to look into this alternative to try to meet the budget issues of CTSA. And then there was agency outreach and service policy development sort of with the transit operators and our key social service partners leading up into the April public hearing where the decision was made. That public hearing was fully noticed in the Auburn Journal, and letters went out to every single registered MyRides and Health Express rider, whether they've been active in the last 5 years or not. So tons of folks were notified of this information. We took public comment at our meeting, and the CTSA board made the decision to make this service change in April. So now looking forward between April and June, I'm doing staff training with Seniors First, my staff, folks involved at the call center and working on client migration, folks who are currently on our existing services who will likely want to continue with the new service, making sure they get their forms in and understand the changes in eligibility, and then stakeholder outreach, which is why I'm here tonight. I'm just trying to spread the word about the service change and take in any information so we can debut this program on July 1 with as much success as possible and as much community buy-in as possible. Next slide. The long-term vision for this program is over the course of the first fiscal year that it's in operation is just sort of to get our feet under us and to expand the program slightly to our existing communities and our existing folks who access social service, but who maybe have been turned away from CTSA's programs previously because of the limits that we've been able to have on the number of riders through the first fiscal year, and then beginning sort of spring, summer of next fiscal year to look at pursuing funding opportunities to be able to expand this program. Although it's maybe not necessarily relevant for Roseville residents, a lot of folks who live in our outlying and foothill communities in Placer County, folks who live in Auburn and who live even farther up the hill, oftentimes their medical appointments are, say, in Grass Valley, or for folks who live in the Tahoe area up in Reno. And we're not able to provide them a means of transportation assistance across those county lines simply because the programs were too expensive to warrant us covering the cost before. But assuming a success of this much more cost-effective program, then we're in a position to start working with our neighboring counties and on those partnerships to solve some of these longstanding transportation issues. And with the final slide, I'm happy to take any questions, and I've put my contact information here. I opened it up to the public. Of course, I assume there'll be public comment on the side, but I don't know. Otherwise, I'm glad to take comments via email and call from anyone who has questions or concerns about this service change. And thank you again for having me this evening.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good to see you. Before we go to questions, commissioners, I want to remind you, typically we will ask if there are any quick clarifying questions before we take public comment. Please save any deeper questions or discussions for after the public. So are there any quick clarifying questions at this time from commissioners?
This is Audrey Husking. I've got a comment first. Seems like the program we had was very, very inefficient. The new program, how long does a person have in order to have a request submitted? And how long does the driver stay with them from the beginning until they're dropped off, or do they wait with them at the appointment? Thank you.
Sure. So thank you for your question. So as I understand your question, it's from the time someone applies to be a part of the program, how long until they're able to start using the program. We anticipate it will be about a month of processing, and how the program operates is on a reimbursement basis. So let's say someone applies in June next month to be a part of this program. They'll be approved, so that July 1 is the first day that they're eligible to start taking trips that are reimbursable. For the whole month of July, they'll take trips, they'll keep track of them with their own volunteer drivers, scheduling them at their leisure, and then their reimbursement sort of monthly form is due back to Seniors First by the 10th of August. So that once the reimbursement request comes in the 10th of August, then Seniors First will process it by the 20th, and by the end of August, they will have received their reimbursement payment for the mileage request. So hopefully I captured your question on that. And then in terms of when the driver stays with the person, because the individual rider has secured the driver from their own community, say it's their neighbor, it's completely up to the rider and the driver what the dynamic of the trip is. If the person requires even, say, a little physical assistance, getting in and out of the car, wants someone to wait with them in the waiting room, all of that is up to the discretion of the rider and the driver to be agreed upon individually. We're not sort of setting policy for how much involvement of the driver. And of course, we hope that part of this will be an effort to build seniors networks and individuals with disabilities networks so that they're continuing to get more contact with folks, particularly coming out of this year when we've all been really isolated.
Commissioner Husking, what are you going to do, or what is your means to recruit volunteers? That's a lot of volunteers.
So the program does not recruit volunteers from an institutional basis. So like, I'm not going to recruit volunteers, and Seniors First is not going to recruit volunteers. The individual riders will recruit their own volunteer from within their community, identifying someone who goes to church with them or is their neighbor and making the ask to say, hey, I have a medical appointment next week. I'm a part of this program called Placer Rides, where you can get reimbursed for the cost to drive me. Would you mind taking me to this appointment? And we have a lot of resources that have been developed by other successful programs who have been running for decades that have talking points and suggestions and people to look for to help work with the participants in the program to identify their own volunteers.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other quick clarifying questions for Kathleen from commissioners? All right, why don't we open it to the public? As a reminder, any members of the public who wish to comment on this item, please call with the number 916-774-5353. The number is on the screen. As a reminder, you'll have 5 minutes to address the commission. Staff, do we have anyone from the public ready to go?
At this point, we don't have any online comments, and we'll wait a minute to see if any calls come in. None yet.
Commissioner Short, this is Commissioner Eisenhower, and I have a question for Kathleen.
Can it wait for after public comment, please, Commissioner Eisenhower?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we do not have any comments.
All right, thanks, Mike. I'll go ahead and close public comment. Commissioner Eisenhower, we can start with you.
Thank you, sir. Kathleen, we noticed that in your presentation here, we have an approximate 100,000 miles or so currently being served by the current program, with an increase of about 3 times the rider service by combining the services and revamping the situation that we have going on now. With the increase to 800,000 miles, that seems to be 8-fold. So we're actually looking at a worse amount of traveling that is occurring. With the state's new SB 743 bill, how has the program or CTSA looked at the impacts that this program is going to have on the roadways moving forward? And is there a way that we can remedy a solution to have, instead of 8 times the amount of traffic generated by this program, maybe something along the lines of 3 times as much traffic, or allowing for people to share ride, or add 1 or 2 onto it and have a carpool situation to reduce some of that vehicle miles traveled?
I appreciate the question. It's really a delight to present in Roseville. When I present up the hill, I never really get VMT and climate change impact questions like that. So glad to take it. I think what my mileage comparison doesn't represent properly on that slide is that the 100,000 miles of our existing program is active passenger on board, but they've already been picked up between their destination. got to keep in mind that our vehicles have to get out to the person to make that trip. And in many cases, our layover facility is currently in Loomis. We have loads of folks in Weimar and Applegate way up the hill. So they're going from our layover facility, driving all the way up to, say, Weimar to pick folks up, driving all the way back down to Roseville, all the way back down to Weimar. So there's a lot of number of miles of non-service miles that are currently happening in the existing programs. And in the most common sense, where someone's identifying a driver from their immediate community, it's likely that they have sort of a adjacency to each other. And in that way, this functions more similar to carpool than it does to a more traditional taxi or Uber Lyft service, where you're having a lot of vehicle miles happening just to go and initiate the trip. To that point, though, I do want to recognize that these are really trips of last resort. If we can get someone on fixed route transit, or we can get someone on dial-a-ride, or we can get them in one of the existing Medi-Cal, Medicare transportation programs where they have existing shuttles, we're certainly going to try to get those folks on those shared ride services first. But really what this program does is respond to the fact that Placer is a rural community, and that especially many of our seniors live in isolated conditions where providing a more shared type of transportation doesn't necessarily apply. For folks who live in Roseville, who are going to medical appointments in Roseville, they'd be on our dial-a-ride service, doing a shared mode, doing their part. This is more for outlying communities. Although Roseville folks are eligible, it's just they're more likely to, because they have transit service, proper transit service, that would be their priority.
So follow-up question for that. Do you believe that the vehicle miles traveled over the approximate 100,000 would be pretty close to being accurate for what we are seeing with this future service? Or is that the unaccounted miles, would you see that it would be kind of a one for one with the new service, or do you think it's going to be more of a increase for this new service? Obviously, if you have more patronage, you're going to have more increase in miles, but are you seeing an overall increase in terms of percentage and longer distances being traveled? Because if there's unaccounted mileage, have you tried estimating that unaccounted mileage and seeing if we can see if this makes sense to be a more environmentally stewardship program?
Sure, I think I could certainly look at accounting for those, the existing program, and how many of its non-revenue miles are occurring. I get reports on that from my contractor, and could probably estimate by the way the current My Rides program operates on the location of drivers in comparison to their riders in terms of determining what the efficiencies are there. But bottom line, I'd say that this is a quality of life issue. And that I hope that the program grows to the extent that we see a greater total and a greater per person number of miles, because these are required to be essential trips by nature. To me, that increase in the total number of miles is not an increase in travel. It's not it's not an increase in travel in the sense that folks are now taking advantage of an underpriced resource in the way that we currently think about VMT. To me, what that represents is folks who were putting off essential errands because they couldn't afford to and didn't have the means to take these trips are now going to their doctor's appointments, going to their physical therapy, going to their follow-up appointments with their surgeons that they may have avoided previously. And I think that as we look at transportation as a whole, which is what I do all day long, I don't just worry about this program, that the places where we look to balance out our system and look at VMT as a whole, our seniors who are trying to get to their doctor's appointments are not the place I start to make the VMT cuts.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathleen. And I appreciate all the effort that you're doing, as well as trying to save money over the long term, because it looks like we're cutting the budget by almost a third, down to a third, but yet being able to triple the amount of effort we're putting in. So thank you very much, and I applaud your effort.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other questions for Kathleen? Okay, hearing none. Kathleen, thanks again for coming and sharing with us. Better service for less money. I can think of some other aspects of government I wouldn't mind see a TSA take that. But for now, thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you, Chair Short.
My internet is cutting out. I'm sorry if that's affecting my audio. Am I back?
You're back.
Thanks. Sorry about that. All right, we'll move on to item 6.2. This is the Mahani Park Open Space Multi-Use Trail Feasibility Study. We will have, this is an action item for commissioners, but first, staff, may we?
Chair Short, I think you cut out, but I think that was my cue to begin the introduction.
Sure was. Thanks, Mike.
Good evening, Chair Short and commissioners. Once again, Mike Dewar, Alternative Transportation Manager. As you mentioned, agenda item 6.2 is a presentation for the Mahani Park Open Space Multi-Use Trail Feasibility Plan. This plan studies the feasibility of developing Class 1 paved trail connections in the Mahani Park area, as contemplated by the city's general plan and bicycle master plan. The city hired Helix Environmental Planning to complete the study. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Meredith Brandstadt from Helix, who will now provide a summary of the study.
Thank you, Mike. If I could have the slideshow, please.
Did we want to play the video first?
We can go ahead and start with the video, and then I'll just skip through the first 2 slides. That's fine. Yes. So. Thank you. And now the slides, please. Okay, so hello, commissioners. Thank you so much for having me here today. As Mike said, my name is Meredith Brandstadt. I'm with Helix Environmental Planning. That video was an introductory video developed by the city as part of this project as we were kicking off our public outreach. So this map shows the project location. As you can see here, the project is located between Finneyment Road and Wood Creek Oaks Boulevard, just south of Pleasant Grove Boulevard, and it borders on Mahani Park, the Roseville Aquatic Center, and Wood Creek High School. Next slide. So we began the project by documenting the existing conditions of the site, the biological resources, doing a recreation analysis and assessing the opportunities and constraints, reviewing all the existing documents, and then coordinating with regulatory agencies and utilities, and also doing some trail use studies on how users were actually using the site. Next slide. So this map summarizes the existing conditions. You can see that the blue, with the light blue, that there are extensive vernal pools and wetlands throughout the site. There's also a lot of mature oaks, especially through the middle, a few creeks, including Caseburg Creek, the East Branch, which is wet year-round, and then 2 other smaller seasonal creeks. And there's also a number of paved multi-use trails that come into the site or come to the edge of the site. And then the other big existing condition factor was the overhead utility lines that go through the site. So there's large transmission towers and then smaller, more local utilities as well as some sewer lines and other underground utilities. Next slide. So we took this information and used it to kind of document those opportunities and constraints. And then we went into a public engagement, our first public engagement opportunity. And due to COVID-19, all of the public engagement for this process was virtual. We had an online survey that ran from May 26th to June 12th last year. And the focus of this survey was to ask about the current use of the site and the desired access and use to the site. And it was publicized through direct mailings, through signs posted around the site, the email list, and there was also an informational news story on ABC 10. And there were over 1,300 responses to the survey. Next slide. So this slide just summarizes some of the most desired existing, or the most used existing access points and the most desired access points. And you can see that from access from Bear Dog Park, from the Roseville Aquatic Center, and from Fediment Road were kind of the prime points, and then also some from the neighborhoods to the south and some of the existing trails. Next slide. So we use this information in combination with discussions with city staff to develop alignment options for the east half and the west half. And we put these out for public response and review through a second online survey, which ran from October 31st through November 13th. Again, this was publicized by city email lists and social media and informational signs placed around the site. And we received 326 responses to this survey. And we think that perhaps part of the reduced response was due to the election that was occurring during the same time frame. Next slide. So this slide shows the three options that were presented during that public outreach for the western alignment. You can see option A mostly ran along the north, option B ran mostly along the south edge of that west half, and then option C was sort of a hybrid, and option C was presented with the opportunity for a mid-block crossing of Fediment Road that would connect to the Sierra Vista specific plan trails. Next slide. And then we presented two options on the eastern half of the site. The first one, option A, provided a smaller loop trail, and then the option B provided a larger loop trail, but both of them created a north-south connection to Sun City Boulevard and connect to the existing parking lot at Bear Dog Park, and also to the existing trails that surround the site. Next slide. So based on the public responses that we got, and again, working with city staff, we developed the recommended alignment, which is for the most part a combination of option A and C in the west and a modification of option B in the east half of the site. So you can see we kept the large loop trail. We added a little secondary short trail connection on the east half to create some more options for distance, and then actually kept both two connections to Fediment Road, one that's closer to the Pleasant Grove Boulevard intersection, and one that would be aligned with the Sierra Vista specific plan trails. And that potential mid-block crossing of Fediment Road would be an at-grade crossing. The City of Roseville engineers have done some preliminary assessment outside of the study that believe that would be feasible. It also includes some intersection improvements for bicycle and pedestrian safety at Pleasant Grove Boulevard and Fediment Road and at Sun City Boulevard. Next slide, please. So the recommended alignment features are that it would construct 2.4 miles of paved multi-use trails. It would permanently create permanent crossings for 5 creek and swales through the site. As I discussed, it would create a mid-block crossing of Fediment Road and then intersection improvements. And there's some other options that would be considered in design development. There may be opportunities for off-street parking along Fediment Road. The trail will look at having expanded shoulders in some areas. And this was in direct response to a lot of public feedback that people really liked the dirt trails and had a strong desire to keep those dirt trails. And all paving options, so both permeable paving and standard pavings, will be considered. And there may also need to be restoration of dirt paths in sensitive areas where they've been worn and existing before. Next slide, please. And along the trails, we're also going to have a number of amenities, including benches, trash stations, dog waste bag dispensers, share the trail signs, and then other interpretive signs and wayfinding signs, both within the site and as part of the trail network as a whole. And there are options for trail or trees, or other shade at certain areas along the trail that can be considered during design. Next slide. So the next steps, we are here at the Transportation Commission tonight, and after this, we'll be going to City Council next month. Then that will complete the feasibility study. Beyond that, the city will work to secure grant funding, and the range of funding required ranges from about 4.3 to 6.7 million. And the range is that great because of the difference in costs between various paving materials, and the fact that it's 2.4 miles of trails, so even a slight difference in cost between them really adds up. Once funding is secured, then there would be technical studies and preliminary engineering to be completed, then environmental review and permitting, and then the final design. Once that's all complete, then the trail could be constructed. And as you see in the graphic on the right, there are opportunities for public participation in many of almost all of the future steps in this process, either with feedback or even potentially with public construction or assistance and volunteer construction of certain amenities along the trails as well. Next slide, please. So that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank you very much for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, this is Jeff. I have joined via phone since I'm having issues apparently with my internet. Sorry about that. I'll try to get back on screen as quick as I can. In the meantime, again, if commissioners have any quick clarifying questions, we're not going to go in depth until after public comment, but any quick clarifying items, please ask now. Okay, hearing none, I'd like to open public comment on this item. Oh, yes?
Yeah, just a quick clarify question for our presenter, Meredith. Can you explain what an impression is on social media and how that correlates to engagement?
Yes, I will do my best. So the impression is, I think, a person who stops to look at it, who like sees the post, and so that's sort of like the number of eyeballs who were on. But I don't. So it's basically that it was publicized to many, many people, but that doesn't mean they necessarily clicked through the link to go to the website or take the survey.
Okay. And can you explain to us how the direct mailing is chosen? You said there were 7,500. Is that just immediate residents around the facility, or is there a mailer list that people may not be aware of?
No, that was a mailing list composed of, I believe it was a half mile, the residents within a half mile of the project site.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Meredith. At this time, I'd like to open public comment. So again, as a reminder, I'm sure it's on the screen, but you may call in for public comment by dialing 916-774-5353, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the commission on this item. Staff, do we have anyone ready to address us?
So far, we do not, but we will wait a minute, see if anyone calls in.
Or if I can get my video back.
We have not received any emails or calls.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Commissioners, do we have any additional comments for Meredith or city staff?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. This is Commissioner Eisenhower. Meredith, can you see, or maybe the city, if permeable pavers were considered in this feasibility study, or is that a design feature that will be looked at later down the road, just so we are more aware of like the runoff situation that may occur with more paved trails, as well as it provides kind of a infiltration and, you know, a greener project?
Yeah, so we considered permeable asphalt and permeable concrete both as alternatives to standard asphalt and standard concrete. We didn't include permeable pavers per se that are like the bricks, just because it provides a very uneven surface for riding bicycles on. But we did consider both of those options that could be used, and the extent of where they might be used would be decided further down the road. But we did discuss them, especially in relation to the vernal pools and the other sensitive areas and the areas within the floodways, that using those kinds of materials would help decrease any impacts to the sensitive wetlands and waters that are in the area.
Got it. And then a couple of questions. Developer funding, I know we're looking at grant funding, but has this been looked at as being part of a bike and ped master plan that may be able to be funded versus with developing, as the west side of Roseville is definitely developing rapidly, especially over the next several years. And during that development phase, can we look at funding from there as a possible source if the grant funding is unsuccessful?
I can answer that, Meredith, if you'd like.
Thanks. Yeah.
Great question. The way that we do developer-funded bike trails is when we have specific plans that are developed, we typically have the project fund bike trails within that specific plan. There have been some times where they've funded connections outside a specific plan area to existing bike paths where they did not quite make it to a specific plan boundary. But in this case, all of the areas immediately surrounding the open space or the Mahani open space have all been planned. All the development agreements have been completed and agreed upon by the developers in the city, and there is no funding provided through those agreements. But I will say that there are a lot of options for grant funding and that we will be exploring those.
And just as a maybe interesting point, part of this particular site was part of, I think, 3 different specific plan areas. It's where many of them came together, which is part of the reason that there's so many trail stubs that kind of come in and then stopped at the edges. And so that's why we were tasked with trying to get everything to connect.
Thank you both. I appreciate the responses.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Yes, Commissioner Short, Doyle Radford. I just had some comments. So I went back there over the last few months, and some of it during the rainy season, and absolutely these are some the vernal pools with the fairy shrimp. It's a protected endangered species, so it's definitely an environmentally sensitive area. And you know, I did like the feel of the dirt paths. It reminded me, and Commissioner Huskins can probably remember of a time in the past where we could jump on these trails, but I could definitely see the issues of the patrons, and since we've gotten bigger, folks crossing the creeks and the swales and creating a mess with that. So I think having the city imprint minimal as possible, if that's a paved trail. I also like the idea of the permeable concrete where the rainwater kind of seeps through it. But I also considered, I know the county does a lot of decomposed granite paths, but that's more of a where you have equestrians and the folks with the horses. But I think as technology's caught up, there's forms of paving where the oil doesn't go off and as the rainwater hits it into the native. So I'm a fan of it. I'd like to see if there's any other options like the permeable concrete, that we consider that as well. But I think that's why I was back there. Paving is the best option because we're going to use the trails anyways. We might as well make sure it's a controlled environment so folks aren't out creating havoc off their own personal trails. And that's all I have.
Commissioner,
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner
Go
Hus,
ahead.
I have a comment. I would like to compliment you on the job you did on this report. It's excellent. We're the envy of many, many communities. We're ahead of time. Good job. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Festerson, I'd like to echo those comments as well. It was a treat to see and read your information, and I'm looking forward to this project. And I like Doyle's comments as well. And I was excited just about the on either side of the pathway, there's going to be an area of the crushed rock, I guess, on one side. There were two different types of rock that are going to be used. So I was excited about that, and excited that we're going to have deliberate trail, like Doyle said, where people are going to be able to know where to walk and enjoy the area. Anyway, well done. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thought I could help.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? All right, hearing none. At this time, we do have a recommended motion to recommend to the City Council to accept the study and direct staff to pursue funding opportunities for next steps, such as environmental documents, permits, design, and construction. Would anybody like to make that motion?
Commissioner Husking, so moved.
Do we have a
Commissioner
second?
Radford, second.
We have a motion and a second. Lainey, can you please take the roll?
Commissioner Birdsong.
Yes.
Commissioner Festerson. Commissioner Festerson. You can come back to me. Commissioner Groff.
Yes.
And Commissioner Husking.
Yes.
Commissioner Eisenhower.
Yes.
Commissioner Probst.
Yes.
Commissioner Radford.
Yes.
And Chair Short.
And I'm a yes as well.
Okay. Can I go back to
Yes, go ahead.
Commissioner Festerson? Did I hear a yes from you? I'm sorry. Okay. I know. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the motion is approved. Thank you. I'd like to echo my fellow commissioner statement. Thank you for all your work. That was a big packet, but made it easy for all of us. So again, thank you very much. Going to move on to item 6.3. This is the fiscal year 2020-21 semi-annual transit performance report. This is also an information-only item. No action is required of our commission. Can we please have the presentation?
Yes. Good evening, Chairperson Short and Transportation Commissioners. I'm Ed Schofield, Transit Operations Analyst for the City of Roseville. The update before you is a semi-annual status report for Roseville Transit. The report covers ridership numbers, performance measures, and some current, kind of a quick overview on some current planning projects we're working on. The ridership numbers and performance measures are from July 1 of 2020 to December 31st of 2020. So as noted in your report, the financial performance measures are not part of this report, but will be provided to the Transportation Commission as part of the year-end transit performance report. The reason for this is that Roseville Transit's operating revenues are received as installments and reimbursements throughout the fiscal year. So because of this, the ridership numbers are received sooner than revenues, which prevents staff from determining actual revenue statistics until later in the year. So, but we did note that staff's current estimates indicate the revenues are coming in as budgeted, except that passenger revenues may be a little lower than anticipated. But we'll provide more of that on the year-end report. So getting into the first slide here, this provides a good visual as to the status of Roseville Transit ridership. And as a reminder, Roseville offers 3 types of service. We offer dial-a-ride service, commuter service, and fixed route service. This slide shows the ridership figures from all 3 services, plus the yellow line there provides the overall numbers in comparison to the previous quarters. So as you can see, the COVID pandemic continues to impact ridership numbers. The stay-at-home order that went into effect in March of 2020 continued through the months shown in this report. And what I wanted to show in this report was the last 2 bar graphs on the right. Those are the 2 quarters that we're looking at. And I wanted to compare it to the previous 4 quarters and obviously show the impact of pre-COVID ridership numbers versus the COVID ridership numbers. Overall, the first 2 quarters of the first 2 quarters that we're looking at are the ridership numbers for 62,000 passengers overall. And that compares to a little over 170,000 passengers from the previous year at that time. So you can see that overall ridership is down significantly, down 64% from fiscal year 20 figures. And truthfully, this type of graph is representative of almost every transit agency in the country, I think. According to the American Public Transit Association, or APTA, public transit ridership dropped nearly 80% in April of 2020, and it remained more than 60% below 2019 levels. So while the numbers are still significantly lower than historical figures from the past years, we have seen a small uptick in ridership that we hope will continue as the stay-at-home orders relaxed. Looking ahead, I've noted in the report that according to APTA, it's anticipated that ridership will remain at current levels through the 3rd quarter, which is what we just finished in the current quarter now, and slowly grow as the vaccines roll out and the stay-at-home orders relaxed. It's anticipated that ridership in 2022 and 23 will remain lower than the 2019 levels that you can see on the left side of this slide. And this is due to the relatively high unemployment rates and also, especially for Roseville side with the commuter service, employers allowing the workers to work remotely on a full-time or partial basis. Next slide. So service quality is another thing we look at, and the next 2 slides, we'll just cover those quickly. But the first slide deals with the number of preventable accidents for our buses per miles traveled. And ideally, you'd like this blue line that you see here to be above the orange line, which is the standard that we have set here for Roseville Transit. And as you can see, it has dipped below on the far right, just below the standard that we've set. There's no explanation, really. It's just we're talking with MV. It's unfortunate that we had a few extra accidents, but we did note that the last quarter that we just finished, and the current one, we don't have any accidents. I haven't checked this week, but we are well above that orange line there for the preventable accidents. The next slide, please. And this is another one, just miles between road calls. This has to do with, basically if buses are breaking down and that impacts our passengers. once again, you'd like to see the blue line above the orange line, and happy to report that we are well above our standards there. There haven't been many road calls, which is a positive thing to share. So, the next slide, please. This is a big one for us on time performance. As you can imagine, this is very important for our passengers. And we're happy to report that the on-time performance for all three services, the local service is the blue, the commuter service is the orange, and the dial ride is the red. And this is the number of times, the percentage that they are on time. And all the numbers are above or consistent with the prior year performance. For dial a ride, we are at 97% on time, and that's well above the 90% standard that we've set. We did want to note, and I think it's in your report, that last year, or the year-end report that we did in January, we reported dial a ride's on-time performance at 69%. It was determined that the actual number was closer to 96%, which is in line with this quarter. And the reason is that, as some of you likely know, dial a ride is a kind of an estimated pickup drop-off process in which passengers book their return trip far in advance, not knowing when their appointment may finish. And in many cases, the appointment finishes earlier than anticipated, and the passenger will call dispatch and request an earlier pickup. Although we can't always do it, we often accommodate the request when we can, and we pick them up earlier than what was scheduled. So, however, by picking the passenger up earlier, the software interprets this as missing our pickup window, even though we were actually providing a higher level of service for our residents. So for this reason, the dial a ride on time performance was shown much lower than it should have been. And we have since corrected the number, and we now show an on time performance, like I said, above the standard of 90%. So before we get on to the next item, I just want to touch on COVID. There's a few items in your report you can read about. I want to go over those. But since we released the report, just last week, TSA reported that face coverings on transit will remain in effect until September 13th. And so because of this, our operators will continue enforcing the mask requirement. And for our passengers, we have sent a number of reminders. I know our transit email newsletter has the reminder on there to wear the mask. It's on social media, and it's on the top of Roseville Transit's homepage. We're also going to do another round of messaging in June to get that word out, because we're assuming there's going to be questions and maybe some confusion as other mask requirements are being lifted in mid-June. So next slide, please. So at this point, beyond the ridership, we do have a number of projects that we're working on that I want to get you updated on. The first one has to do with microtransit. We're pretty excited about getting a pilot program in place. In the middle of last year, Kathleen, who you met earlier from Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, began coordinating monthly meetings with Roseville Transit and the other transit agencies in Placer County to evaluate the potential for microtransit service in Placer County. So before I go much further, on your slide here, you can see, what is microtransit if you're not familiar with it. These are a few of the key ways of explaining it. It's flexible transit. It's somewhere between private vehicles and mass transit. It allows agencies to offer riders an on-demand option that's more flexible than fixed route buses. And riders can request to pick up anywhere within a designated service area, and then transported to their destination or their nearest transfer center or the nearest bus stop. I mean, that's stuff that we would determine. And then the vehicles that are used can be buses, paratransit vehicles, or other designated vehicles such as vans. I guess ultimately microtransit's like using Uber or Lyft for those of you that have done it, except it's a carpool process. But we've met internally and have identified 3 microtransit candidates for a pilot program. And what I'd like to do now is just show quickly the three candidates. Next slide, please. That we'll be studying. Next slide. The first one, candidate number 1, is working in East Roseville, and that's currently where the Route L serves. So Douglas Boulevard and Sierra College Boulevard, that area over to Eureka. We could envision a microtransit area there, maybe over towards Kaiser, and also Maidu, the park, the senior center, kind of using that area as a microtransit pilot program. That one was is something that we think has a high chance of being successful. Option number 2, next slide, please. This is another option. This is the Route S, which is serves the Santucci Justice Center, and it provides service between Santucci and the Galleria. And this option, we would try to serve also the Fairway Drive or Fairway Road there to kind of pick up a lot of the businesses there that parallel Highway 65. So that was our second option. And then option 3, next slide. This is the Route M, and I know it's just very right-hand side there, but the key is we see West Roseville as a good microtransit option. All the growth that continues to take place in West Roseville. Currently, Route M ends up at Market and Pleasant Grove, and we would look at possibly ending the Route M at Mahani Park and then capturing the rest of that area as a microtransit on-demand type service. And so that was our third option. So the next steps for us is we're working with Kathleen, like we said, in PC, Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, to analyze the 3 options for Roseville as well as other options within Placer County. We're going to hire a company that specializes in microtransit to analyze these options, and then following the analysis, we will then agree on one option that we will implement a 2-year pilot program and for Roseville, and as well as the pilot programs in Placer County. And if it's successful, staff will then look into expanding microtransit opportunities to other locations throughout the city. Our target date to implement the pilot program is later this year, maybe in the fall. So we're pretty excited about it. I know there's probably more we could cover in a future presentation, maybe when we get the option in place. But you're seeing a lot of this type of, you see a lot of microtransit just coming out throughout the country. I mean, Sacramento has started doing it, and I think it's a great way to provide flexibility for our passengers, and this on-demand service is, I think, a good way to go. So next slide, please. So this another project we're working on that I believe we touched on briefly in the January report is the South Placer Express project, and just wanted to report that we're making progress. What this is the slide here is just a high-level project area, but the service is going to provide, we're going to provide 30-minute service from Lincoln down to Roseville, serving key Roseville destinations such as, or the 3 are the Galleria, Sutter Medical Facility, and Kaiser. And then from there, it will then go down Douglas, get on the freeway, and go to the Watt and I-80 light rail station. So the idea is, like I said, to provide this all-day 30-minute service to hopefully encourage people to get out of their cars and utilize this service. As part of the service, we're going to be purchasing 5 electric buses and chargers as well. So the current timeline for this is to purchase the buses hopefully in the fall, and then we want to start service in spring or summer of 2023. So another project we're very excited about, and one we maybe do a little more detailed overview as it gets a little closer. And then the last slide, please. And this is just a quick overview. Another item that we reported on in January, the commuter bus electrification and charging station project. As we reported in our last report, the city has received federal grants to purchase 5 battery electric buses to replace our older diesel buses. And we've also received state and local grants to purchase chargers and construct a charging station at the city's courtyard. So the contract for designing the charging station was awarded to Somas, and we're about 30% design. The 30% design is complete for the charging depot. And as for the buses, we've been working closely with Proterra, who is the designer of the buses. And what you see on the slide here is a Proterra bus. And it might not look exactly like that, but we've been working closely with Proterra to design the buses. There'll be commuter buses, and we expect the contract to award the 5 buses to happen in June, hopefully June, like next month, or maybe the month after that. So that's it. At this point, I'll open it up for any questions.
Thanks, Ed. Commissioners, do we have any quick clarifying questions for staff? Not hearing any. I actually do have one. On the 3 options you talked about for the microtransit, are those options independent of each other, or do you think you're likely to select just one of those to look at initially?
I think we would look at all 3 of them initially when we get a consultant on, but they are independent. I think the idea is that we would pick one of those 3 just to run the pilot program. And like I said, if it's successful, we would then like to then expand it, and those other 2 options would probably be likely candidates later.
Got it.
Okay.
Right.
Commissioner Eisenhower here. Quick clarifying question. How often are these routes planning on going? I see travel times between 14 and 21 minutes by your estimates here. Are you looking at running these on demand when they're requested, or peak hour, all day? How many times per hour? Do you have those figured out yet, or is those still preliminary?
I'd say we're still preliminary, but I would like to think we would be on demand all day. I mean, we're trying to provide a higher level of service than what we're currently operating with the fixed route service. So I would hope that we could provide it on demand throughout the day, not just peak times. But we do still have some work to do and some analysis, and because we have to look at our resources, what we can offer, and that's part of what this microtransit expert or consulting firm will be looking at.
Okay, so at this time, I'd like to open this up to public comment. Apologize for the noise. Once again, I'm sure it's on the screen, but anyone wishing to give public comment, please call 916-774-5353. You'll have 5 minutes. Staff, do we have anyone ready to comment?
We do not at this point, so we'll give it a little bit and see if anyone calls in. Chair Short, we do not have any public comments.
Thanks, Mike. Commissioners, any questions or comments for staff?
Commissioner Eisenhower here. On your route to, it looks like you guys have planned, preliminary, of course, the route to not go along Roseville Parkway on demand. Have you looked at connecting to the industrial center, and that's a huge employment hub for the city of Roseville? Have you looked at trying to connect that with housing, or do you already have services that look at connecting your employment hub with residential around the city, or to the Justice Center, and I believe Route 2 was the Justice Center and the mall.
I'm sorry, the question would be to looking beyond the Santucci Center to serve that business area, like.
Yeah, so instead of just creating a straight line from Santucci, I believe it's Santucci over down to the mall. If I'm remembering Route 2 correctly.
Yes.
Is it possible we can pull up that slide for Route 2?
Yeah, it'd be Route S, I think, is what you're.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we would, I mean, part of what we can do is define, the service area. So we have that ability. And if I would assume we wouldn't just serve the Santucci Center, that we could define the service area to maybe capture the business in that area, the industrial area. I mean, currently it's not a real high ridership area, but maybe, with better service, maybe with on-demand, we could get more riders, and that would be the hope. So I guess basically we have that flexibility. We can define the parameters of the service. And it doesn't have to be a straight line. I was just trying to capture where we would like to serve and make sure we get, more service to those areas.
This is a phenomenal route. I think if it's currently not served or underutilized, I think it would be phenomenal to create something central around there. But I know we have a lot of housing outside of this area that also can maybe funnel over into the employment center there. So if that could be in a consideration, that would be phenomenal, just to make sure we're well-rounded in our routes there, especially with the expansion of Roseville Parkway and the bridge to connect Washington and Industrial and eventually over to Foothills. That would be a phenomenal route to see.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Ed, thanks again for your report. Again, this was a information only item, so we will move on. Thanks again.
Thank you, commissioners.
Our last presentation today is for item 6.4. This is the Public Works Capital Improvement Projects for fiscal year 2022. This is another information only item, no action required. Staff, can we please have your presentation?
Good evening, Chair Short and members of the Commission. My name is Jason Tchaikovsky, and I'm your Public Works Director. It's always a pleasure to get to present information to the Commission, but tonight I have the pleasure of sharing some information about the key capital improvement projects that Public Works plans to pursue in fiscal year 2022. The combined value of the CIPs in this presentation, including projects budgeted in previous years, those being budgeted in fiscal year 22, and those currently in the planning phase where construction will be budgeted sometime in the future, totals $103,000. Just a sec, my note stopped. So leading off the presentation are the Public Works projects that will be under construction in fiscal year 22. The $4.5 million state gas tax funded phase 1 of the Sun City Road Rehabilitation Project, shown on the map above, will begin this summer, with the other 2 phases rehabilitating the rest of Sun City's pavement over the next 3 to 4 years. Currently, the phase 1 pedestrian ramps are being updated to current ADA standards per federal requirements, the need for which adds another $2.5 million to the total cost of the rehabilitation of the Sun City area. In addition, street cracks are currently being filled in anticipation of this summer's road rehabilitation work. Next slide. In addition to the Sun City resurfacing highlighted at the top left of this map, we anticipate a $2 million residential resurfacing project that will repair and seal streets primarily within the Hillcrest neighborhood after the completion of a water line rehabilitation project in that area. The Hillcrest neighborhood is the area with all of the blue towards the center of the map. Funding for Hillcrest resurfacing comes from state gas tax and the new SB1 gas tax passed into law in 2017. Also, construction has begun on the $7 million federally funded arterial resurfacing project, which are all the roads in blue outside of the Sun City and Hillcrest neighborhoods on this map. Working on the arterial resurfacing project will continue through the summer. The plans for the bridge preventative maintenance project were recently approved by City Council. Staff is now seeking bids to rehabilitate and repair 16 bridges around the city that were previously identified by Caltrans to be in need of preventative maintenance treatments. The $2 million project is funded by Highway Bridge Program funds and is anticipated to be completed this summer. Phase 1 of the Washington Andorra project was recently awarded to Tykert Construction at the May 5th council meeting. The construction will begin by the end of this month. The $6 million project will construct a continuous bike trail from All-America City Boulevard to Pleasant Grove Boulevard along Washington. It will also widen Washington between Sawtell and Caseburg to 4 lanes, install a new traffic signal at Caseburg, and widen northbound Washington from just south of Diamond Oaks up to Pleasant Grove. The project is funded with a mix of active transportation grants and congestion mitigation air quality grant funds. It is being funded with developer paid traffic mitigation fees and local transportation funds. The much anticipated Washington Boulevard at All-America City Roundabout project is scheduled to begin construction this summer as well. This project will meet multiple needs in the area. It provides a controlled intersection to help the expected increase in traffic from the grounds to safely exit All-America City Boulevard. It provides for the safe crossing of pedestrians between the east and west side of Washington. It provides a connection for the Woodbridge Elementary School and surrounding neighborhood to the new multi-use trail being constructed by the Andorra project. And it provides for the traffic calming of vehicles entering the Old Town area from the higher speed Washington Boulevard arterial to the north of the project. As the entrance to the Old Town area of Roseville, the project includes landscaping and a roundabout design feature paying homage to Roseville's tie to the railroad. The estimated cost is $4 million, and the funding is primarily coming from federal grants, CMAQ money, and some Transportation Development Act funds used for the design and to meet the 11% federal local fund matching requirements. Later this fall, the Roseville Parkway Extension project will begin construction. This project will provide for a 6th connection of East and West Roseville over the railroad tracks that bisect our city. Having another crossing of the tracks will measurably reduce traffic volumes on Pleasant Grove and Blue Oaks and will likely have a positive impact on the other crossings as well. This project is not only designed to provide an aesthetically pleasing vehicle overcrossing of the railroad tracks, it'll provide the first family-friendly multi-use trail crossing of the railroad in Roseville. Another such crossing is planned along Foothills Boulevard over the tracks with the future Dry Creek Greenway West multi-use trail project, which will run from Riverside Avenue to Cook Riola Road out in the county. The estimated cost is $22 million, and funding is coming from developer-paid traffic mitigation fees. As mentioned in the previous presentation, staff across multiple departments are coordinating with the Public Works Department to facilitate the $3.5 million zero-emission bus charging station project at the city's Corporation Yard. This project will design and construct the first phase of the ultimate 25 battery electric bus charging station facility so that Roseville Transit can charge the 5 commuter and 5 South Placer Express battery buses soon to be on order, and have the capacity to charge the additional battery electric buses expected to follow in the coming years. The project will also include the infrastructure for the future charging needs of the city's fleet of sedans and pickup trucks as they continue to be converted to plug-in electric vehicles. Design is currently underway, as Ed mentioned, with construction anticipated later this fall. Staff is also preparing several key projects for construction in the near future. Design continues on the Dry Creek Greenway Phase 1 project, which will construct a bike trail from Riverside Darling to Rocky Ridge Drive along Linda and Dry Creeks. This $17 million project is primarily funded through several grants and will require extensive environmental permitting, sensitive design considerations, and dozens of property acquisitions and negotiations, but should be ready for construction later next year. Design recently began on the Roseville Parkway widening project. This project will relieve daily congestion by widening Roseville Parkway in the vicinity of the Creekside Center, the fountains, and the Galleria Mall from 3 lanes in each direction to 4 lanes in each direction between Creekside Ridge Drive and Gibson Drive. The project will also construct a 3rd westbound left turn lane on Pleasant Grove for vehicles traveling from Highway 65 turning left towards the regional shopping destinations. The estimated cost is $8 million and is primarily funded with North Central Community Facilities District funding, along with a smaller share of traffic mitigation fees. And construction could start as early as 2023. Staff is preparing to release a request for proposals this summer to design the Pleasant Grove widening project. This project will help relieve daily commute congestion by widening Pleasant Grove from 2 lanes in each direction to 3 lanes in each direction from east of Foothills Boulevard to just west of Wood Creek Oaks Boulevard. The estimated cost is $7 million and will be funded by developer-paid traffic mitigation fees, and construction could begin as early as 2023. Staff plans to release a request for proposals this summer to design the new fire station number 8 located on the southeast corner of Wood Creek Oaks and Painted Desert. The estimated project cost is $8 million and could be under construction as early as 2023. Also discussed this evening in a previous presentation was the design of the $2 million mahani it's more than $2 million, that's an old estimate now, at $426 million mahani multi-use trail project. That design is anticipated to begin this fall. The project will connect multi-use trails from Wood Creek Oaks to Fitiment and Junction to Pleasant Grove and the open space around Wood Creek High School, the Aquatic Center, and Mahani Park. Construction could begin as early as 2023. Also scheduled to begin design later this year is the Vernon Street and Folsom Road Roundabout project. This project will provide improved pedestrian access on the eastern end of our Vernon Street, encourage traffic calming for vehicles entering the downtown area, and enhance the aesthetics of the gateway into downtown Roseville. The current estimated cost is around $4 million, and funding is expected to come from federal grant money, Transportation Development Act money, and state gas tax. And construction could begin by late 2023, early 2024. And the last CIP I want to mention to you this evening is the 1/2 mile Miners Ravine Drive to Orvieto Drive bike trail connection. Pending council approval of design funding later this year, staff could begin developing plans in the spring of 2022, with construction as early as 2024, pending identification of the needed construction funding. The preliminary cost estimate for the entire project, including design, is $2 million. So while I've shared many critical projects with you that your Public Works team is moving forward to complete, there's still more underfunded urgent work that needs to be completed, both locally and regionally. The Blue Oaks Bridge widening project, which you notice I haven't mentioned tonight, it would widen the Blue Oaks Bridge over the railroad tracks to 4 eastbound and 4 westbound lanes, relieving the congestion that is developed along this section of the corridor. We get requests a lot to construct this project. The current estimated cost of the improvement is $23 million. The project will one day be fully funded with developer-paid traffic mitigation fees. Unfortunately, even if the economy keeps going the way it is now, which is actually pretty strong on the development side, we are looking at 2028 before we would have enough funding to start construction. Also earlier tonight, I shared the Andorra Phase 1 project with you. We have the funding and are beginning that Phase 1 work soon. However, the Phase 2 project has an estimated cost of $30 million. It involves widening the railroad underpass, which is rather expensive. Similar to Blue Oaks, it will eventually be funded 100% by developer-paid traffic mitigation fees at some point in the future. My best guess right now would be sometime between 2035 and 2040. Road maintenance is another critical area that we are short on sufficient resources. When done correctly, the most cost-effective methods at the correct time, nobody thinks about road maintenance. However, when things start to fall apart, people take notice. But unfortunately, at that point, it's already too late to use the less expensive preventative measures. Maintenance costs go up because the methods remaining to repair the deteriorated roads are much more expensive than preventative treatment. Currently, our optimum road maintenance program, the one that is the most efficient and effective, is about 2/3 funded. We're coming up about $3 million to $4 million per year short of what is optimum. While we work very smart with the resources we have, without more funding, our pavement quality will slowly degrade over time. The baseline road widening project is a regional project and has the potential to reduce commute traffic significantly on Roseville roads and provide the west side of town with quick and convenient access to Sacramento and the airport. Our development community is working hard to build the necessary infrastructure within the borders of the city of Roseville, but what happens to our west? How will we ensure this vital connection is upgraded in a timely manner to serve our community's needs now? And similar questions can be raised about the Placer Parkway connection between Highway 65 and Highway 99, the widening of the very busy Highway 65 to reduce congestion, and the desperately needed Phase 2 improvements to the 80-65 interchange to remove regional bottlenecks. So how do we fund these urgent underfunded projects when we have exhausted most of our local funding options? The first place we look to is state and federal grants. And we have applied for many over the past few years. However, grant funding has become extremely competitive. Our region has difficulty winning many state grants because they're often designed to meet the needs of larger cities or areas with large disadvantaged communities. And federal grants are often geared towards mega projects on the federal highway system and are less likely to fund local transportation issues. On top of the qualification challenges, many of the grants require a large portion of local matching funds, sometimes up to 50% to be competitive. The city and the region don't typically have that kind of local funding available. So what do? That's where the regional funding strategy comes in. Leaders from private and public sectors are coming together to address this issue of transportation. One item seriously being considered is a transportation sales tax, a similar measure narrowly missed being approved during the 2016 election. A 1/2 cent local sales tax, similar to the one proposed by the 2016 measure, could provide the local match funding necessary to help our grant requests be more successful and to help accelerate many of the underfunded projects that we need built today. It could also help fill the gap in our road maintenance funding. So with that concludes my CIP presentation, and I am available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jason. Before we go to public comment, commissioners, are there any quick clarifying questions? Not hearing any. Like to open public comment, invite members of the public to address us on this item. Again, public comment can be made by calling 916-774-5353. Numbers there on the screen. And as a reminder, you will have 5 minutes to address the commission. Mike, do we have anyone ready to comment?
We do not at this time.
Chair Short.
Okay. Give it a minute. Yes.
This is Jason Shaikowski, and we did receive one email public comment before the meeting that I would like to share.
Yes, please.
So it's from Derek Pell, and he had a request to improve the sidewalks and other pedestrian facilities between the downtown and Harding Boulevard, especially along Sutter Avenue and Folsom Road. The sidewalk is very narrow and unpleasant to walk along with perceived speeding traffic, bumpy sidewalks, and broken sidewalks. He feels this community would be otherwise be one of the most walkable neighborhoods in the city. And he'd like to urge the Public Works Department to consider widening sidewalks as part of the resurfacing project. So I have some comments on that if you'd like to hear them.
Yeah, I know the city is looking at kind of revitalization of that whole area. Can you comment on that, Jason?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I just received something from Lauren Hawker today about the corridor plans that are going on throughout some of the infill areas of the city. And you can go to roseville.ca.us/corridor plans, one word, where you can learn about the planning going on for those communities and participate through virtual community meetings. In fact, there's a virtual community meeting scheduled for June 9th at 5 p.m. and that would be a great way to share your thoughts.
And Jason or anyone else who might have the answer, are we still holding out hope for the SACOG Green Means Go funding? Because I know that particular corridor was being looked at for that as well.
Do you have info on that, Mike?
The Green Means Go funding, I think it's being considered by the state legislature right now in the budget, but I'm not. So I believe these specific plans will really set us up for that type of funding if it becomes available. But so far, it hasn't been approved through the legislative process. But we are actively working with SACOG to generate support for that.
Thank you both. Have we received any additional public comment?
We have not.
All right, then I will close public comment at this time and go back to our commission. Anyone want to comment or ask some questions on this item?
Commissioner Eisenhower here. I saw that you guys are planning a conversion of the Vernon and Folsom area to a roundabout, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
There's a parking lot that is highly utilized there for the local businesses downtown. With that removal, are we expecting those individuals to park along maybe available street parking or into the parking garage? And has that been considered? Do the parking garages currently have the capacity? And are there adequate pedestrian facilities between the parking garage to the local businesses that parking lot would serve?
Yeah, so that is one of the things we're looking at. So by installing the roundabout at this location, we're actually going to close the intersection of where Atlantic Street meets Atlantic Street right in the middle of the S-curve. That will become some additional parking area. We also, as part of this project, a year or two ago, purchased that area that received the number 6. There's that parking lot. It's kind of 6 and 7. That was owned by Sure West Consolidated Communications. The city purchased that lot actually for this project, but that's going to allow us to combine the little short street you see there with where the number 6 is and create a parking area there. So we'll have 2 parking fields, one where the 6 is and one where the 7 is on the visual here. So we will try to maintain as much parking as we can in the area. All the parking studies show that we have sufficient parking if we do that in the downtown. But the important thing with this project is right now we have people parking in that existing lot and trying to cross the street there. And cars are coming through the S-curve at somewhat higher rates of speed, and it's got poor visibility. And what we're going to do is we're going to slow them down and provide a safer crosswalk with pedestrian refuges in the middle of Vernon Street. So we think it'll be a big pedestrian improvement.
Thank you. And a second question, different topic. You mentioned that there is plans to widen East Roseville Parkway from Pleasant Grove to Galleria Boulevard. There is a projected 3 turns for Pleasant Grove to Roseville Parkway. And if we're all familiar with that area, and it's definitely needed. Is there consideration on the other end of that expansion to allow for 3 lanes to be turning from Roseville Parkway to Galleria Boulevard, assuming that's a northbound or an eastbound movement? Has that been considered in our impact plan for future? I know that intersection there ultimately may become grade separated, or has that been abandoned? I mean, I remember reading plans in the past that the intersection needs some work. It's been revised recently, but still could use some effort to help progress traffic a little bit better and safely.
Sure. Well, the urban interchanges, those have all left the city's general plan. They were rather fascinating. We were going to have several interchanges between city streets throughout the city, and that was determined by council. That would make us look, we definitely lose our character that we have in Roseville by looking like we have a bunch of freeways running through the middle of town. So those are gone. Triple lefts coming from Roseville Parkway turning north on Galleria. I don't believe we can get that to fit. Now we're looking at capacity at that left turn. And what we've seen for the most part is poor utilization of both turning lanes. So people tend to want to be in one lane, and they want to be, for some reason, in the outside, the lane closest to farthest away from the median in that turn pocket. And so what's happening is we're not getting enough vehicles through there. So we're looking at extending left turn pockets, trying to encourage people to use that. But by doing this widening project, what's really going to help is we're going to be able to adjust our signal timing, our coordination through that area. Because right now we just don't have enough storage capacity to increase our cycle lengths to keep cars moving along Roseville Parkway more than we're doing right now. Right now we're running about a little over a 2-minute cycle, and we can go to a 2.5-minute cycle or maybe even 3 with the changes we're going to make out there to allow Roseville Parkway to really keep cars moving and not have to stop. Because every time you stop cars, there's a startup lost time where people, they have to wait. They see, oh, it's green. Then they hit their accelerator. They have to accelerate. That's time you lose moving cars through the intersection. So I guess short answer is no, I don't think we can fit a triple left there, but I can definitely have the consultant take a quick look.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then have you looked at the alignment issue? I think mainly you mentioned utilization between the inside and the outside lane. Just from experience, I've noticed the outside lane does stack up relatively quickly. The inside lane, we do see people try and sneak in when they can once that outside lane is filled up. But have you looked at an alignment? Because that turn is not a typical 90-degree turn. It's a relatively sharp inside radius turn there. Is there any kind of remedy that the city could look at if we can't expand and do triple left, maybe realigning the intersection slightly to allow for a more expedient turn that would allow for safer movements and people maybe become more comfortable with a left turn and maybe an evenly split utilization for the roadway there, or the lanes inside and outside?
Yeah, that's something we can definitely look at. As you were talking, it got me thinking, we can look at origin destination of the vehicles making the left turn, and are they trying to get to the outside lane or the inside lane? And in outside lanes or the inside lanes. And if it's more to the outside, the curbside lanes, we could look at maybe pushing the left turn extension line maybe to the outside lanes. Like we do that on northbound Sunrise at Eureka because everyone wants to get onto the freeway at that location. So we push actually the left turns farther out than they would typically be. So that's something we can look at. That may help with that turn as well. So I'll add that to my list of things for staff to look at.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Commissioner,
Any other comments?
Commissioner Husking, I would just like to say I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in human form at some point, and hopefully y'all have a very safe and happy Memorial Day weekend.
Absolutely. I don't think we're quite done, but that's the right sentiment all the same. Commissioner Radford, did you say you had comments?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Short. I wanted to commend Jason and his team. That was a great report. I was excited to see the work that's coming up, as well as Mike Doerr. I love our trails, and I think Roseville really sets the bar regionally on alternate transportation. I really see connectivity with our trails happening in my lifetime, and I really didn't when I first started on the Parks Commission many moons ago, and you guys have done a great job. And I see the vision, and I didn't always understand it either. So, when you guys proposed the roundabout about a decade ago, I was a naysayer, the first one at Oak Street in Washington, and many of us were, right? And now after seeing it implemented, and those of us that have figured out how to use it, it's great, it's fluent. There was always accidents there at the old stop sign, and it's much better. So I commend your fortitude and insight in that. And I'm looking forward to the one at All American Speedway, and especially the one at, I know it's a ways out, Folsom Road and Vernon Street. I live right there. And those folks that live on Walnut, I mean, they, you know, they'll from time to time pretend they're in Europe and go southeast right off of Walnut where it merges with Folsom. And I've almost had a few head-ons there. So having a roundabout gives them a more, a legal option about going towards the square. So that's going to be a good project. And I did want to add that kind of piggyback on what Jason had mentioned about the underfunded projects, the Blue Oaks widening and the Andorra undercrossing right there at Washington, you know, and I know we've got to work with the railroad on that, but those dates are unacceptable. And I know a lot of us put our heads together in 2015 and 16 and came up with a pretty good countywide solution, and we were just short of it. But I'm optimistic about the prospective of getting it done next year. And I mean, if anybody's got any other options other than a countywide or at least Roseville, Rockland, Lincoln collaboration, please speak up, because I mean, you know, a local tax to fix 65. I like going out to Sutter County, and I don't like it taking me 2 hours what I can get done in, 20, 30 minutes. So I'm really encouraged to hear that the mines are putting together a plan, and I'd like to be a part of it. And again, great job. And to echo Commissioner Huskins, hope everybody has a good Memorial Day weekend.
Any other commissioners want to comment on this item? All right. Seeing none, Jason, thank you very much for your presentation. Very informative. We appreciate it. We'll move on to commission and staff reports. Does any commissioners have an item to report to the group? All right. Seeing none, I do have one. I participated in Supervisor Gore's kind of what's happening on the western side development presentation. Want to thank city staff for participating in that. It was very informative. Jason, I think a lot of what you showed us today had as part of that meeting too. So I just want to thank you guys for that collaboration with our friends at the county. To kind of tell people what is coming out here on the edge of civilization, as I like to say, out here in far west Roseville. Does any staff have any informational items or further updates to report?
Chair Short, I have one short update.
Please.
At the January 2021 Transportation Commission meeting, you might recall that Jennifer Higgins called in and submitted some comments about a potential transit stop being added to Route M at the corner of Pleasant Grove, west of Fitterman. And she also recommended upgrades to the pedestrian crossing at that location. So I wanted to share that we worked with the traffic signal group, and they went out and actually did some upgrades to the push button to make it more responsive to Mrs. Higgins' needs as a sight impaired person. And they also gave her some training on how to use it, because for some of the specialized buttons, which are not at every signal in Roseville, but at some of the signals, there is some special training available for that. We do have, I believe, videos online that show the public how to do that. And then we are also working internally to get that stop added to Route M. So there's some procedural tasks that we need to take care of, but that's on the horizon. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
Very good. Thank you, Mike, and your staff for being responsive to the residents that reach out. I think we all very much appreciate that. Any other comments Seeing none, we'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Commissioner
moved.
Haskins, that was Commissioner Festerson. Commissioner Haskins, you were on mute. Is that a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Have
Hope
a
to
great
see you in person
weekend.
soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.